Hey, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Welcome back. A favorite pastime is predicting the future in politics. If 2023 served up some major curveballs, we're expecting a whole lot of the same in 2024. So today we brought two powerhouse political voices in Canada to play a little clairvoyant with us, give us their best foreshadowing of what to expect in the new year. We'd like to welcome Sabrina Maddeaux and Supriya Dwivedi. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join our listeners on the pod.
My pleasure.
So maybe we'll just, if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple intro comments about yourself. Maybe Sabrina, we'll start with you.
For sure. Well, I'm Sabrina, and I'm a political columnist with the National Post. I'm mostly focused on federal politics, but really what I write about is dictated by the news of the day. I've written a lot, in particular, about housing affordability, monetary policy, and also a lot about what's happening overseas with the current state of the world, whether that's in the Ukraine or what's going on between Israel and Hamas right now. It's never a boring moment, for better or worse, in my job, and I love what I do.
Amazing. Thank you. Supriya.
Yeah, I'm Supriya. My day job is that I'm the Director of Policy and Engagement at the Center for Media Technology and Democracy at McGill University, where I primarily work on our information ecosystem and all of the ways it is quite vulnerable currently and subject to, manipulation, whether we're talking about foreign actors or not, and how it plays out in the Canadian context. My own background is somewhat eclectic. I went to law school, but as my parents will point out, I never became a lawyer. And then I was a talk radio host for 4 years on a talk radio station here in Toronto. And I still dabble here and there in journalism with like columns and the like. But just, I guess, wonky nerd now for the time being.
It's okay. I'm a wonky nerd with some law degrees that doesn't practice law either. So I'm right there with you. We love wonky nerds here. Let's start in 2023 before we go on to 2024. What do you feel was the biggest moment domestically in Canada that we had in politics this year?
I'm not sure what the exact tipping point was, but clearly there was a moment in late July or early August where if you look at the trend lines for polling across multiple different pollsters in aggregate, you see there's like a perceptible drop-off for the Liberals. Now, there have been quite a few posited, theories as to what perhaps that one thing could have been. But I think the most consistent argument I've heard is a comment that was made by the Prime Minister, and I'm going to paraphrase here, in which the central message essentially was that housing is not the sole carriage or responsibility of the federal government, and it is shared across multiple jurisdictions, which of course is true. But I think in terms of the moment and the mood and the feeling that all Canadians were feeling, it just didn't sit right. And you've seen that, particularly with, rents skyrocketing now, no longer in like the big cities. Now smaller cities and even towns are seeing rents skyrocket by quite a bit. If anybody was up for a mortgage renewal this year, I'm pretty sure you're pissed at those rates and what you're now paying. So, I would chalk it up to that because that seemed to have at least shaped the latter 6 months or 5 months of the political narrative and debate in this country.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Sabrina?
I just want to add to that. I think you definitely highlighted a great moment where the polls started to change, and that can be traced back to Trudeau making those comments. The other thing that was in the news during that time period were all the refugees basically abandoned on the streets of Toronto that started making the front pages. And I think that in conjunction with the complete stepping back from any sort of responsibility for housing put together left a bad taste in a lot of Canadians' mouths. I think also as as a country, we like to see ourselves as being very welcoming, as being a nation that is a role model on the world stage. And to see, again, refugees just left abandoned on the streets of Toronto with no food, no water, in the cold, really struck at the heart of who we see ourselves to be as Canadians. So that, maybe took away some of the rose-colored glasses for people. In terms of another domestic political moment I would highlight, I would say Danielle Smith's win as Alberta Premier. There's a lot going on with federalism and the relationship between the federal government and the provinces right now. In most recent years, the tension has largely been between Quebec and the federal government, but we're seeing more and more tensions between Alberta and the federal government. And the more they push for independence, whether that's with their pension system or challenging certain laws, even the plastic straw ban in the courts, it'll be really interesting because other provinces will certainly be taking note and want to follow along. So it could have implications for how we function as a country overall.
Mm-hmm. Supriya, you mentioned the polls. Let's stick with that for a moment. The polls shifted pretty dramatically this year. Would love to get the sense from both of you on what worked and what didn't for our major political leaders in 2023.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, let's start with the Conservatives. So I think what works for the Conservatives is when they are sticking to pocketbook style messaging, the day-to-day affordability issues. I think I don't remember what month it was. It was summer. It was warm. So let's say one of the summer months, Poilievre came out with a housing video in which he showed a transit station and just being like, isn't it nuts that there are no towers around here? Think about what this could be and the potential for unlocking, X amount of extra units and how it would be for you as a student. And he was like targeting a very specific demographic there. I think that works incredibly well for them. I think what doesn't work for them is when Mr. Poilievre, talks about radical gender ideology, or he's calling the prime minister a Marxist, or he's gotten caught with using an incel adjacent tag on all of his YouTube videos for the last 4 years. I think those are the issues that are incredibly positive for capital C conservative base, so members that would like to see the Conservatives take on the Liberals on some of the more culture war-y stuff, but it doesn't tend to play out super well with like general audiences. On the Liberal side, what has worked in, again, that latter bit, particularly when we're talking about the polling kind of falling under them, I would say Minister Fraser has done an incredible job with the Housing Accelerator Fund. And, a lot of folks were scoffing at that initially as not being much of a tool, but we've seen him unlock, just thousands of units of housing from multiple cities, which has also drawn the ire of a few premiers, including Danielle Smith, I believe, Sabrina. So a good thing for highlighting that from the onset. And I think for the Liberals, what works for them, honestly, is when they are also speaking not just to the folks that are, online partisans that are going to cheer on the Liberals for anything and everything they say, but are focusing on the core issues that matter to Canadians. And in this climate, that means affordability, and it means housing. And, even like 5-ish years ago, it would be, you wouldn't have found any of the major party leaders talking about housing in the way they are. So it just goes to show what a difference it has made in these last, I would say 2-ish years, where, I would often be on a panel as like the youngest one there, being like, guys, it's kind of weird that the only way to become a homeowner is if you're the descendant of homeowners and your parents or your in-laws confront you cash. Yeah. And that's how we get into Hunger Games territory.
Right.
And everyone would just be like, oh, Supriya, the millennial, like, oh, don't worry, like, it'll be fine. In our day, mortgages were 18% and like, or whatever. And I had to walk uphill both ways to school. But increasingly, boomers are recognizing it, probably because their millennials are still in their fucking basement in their house, pardon for the swear. But it just like, it's the whole conversation has shifted, and I'm glad it's shifted because we can't be in Hunger Games territory. No. We have to be building not just, houses for those that are already upper middle class, but like affordable housing, co-op housing, and just like purpose-built rental stock in this country on a scale that we haven't seen in the last, I want to say 30 years, because I'm talking about the 70s, but we actually mean like 50 years ago, right, at this point.
Sabrina, thoughts on what our major political leaders did do and didn't do, what they should have done, maybe?
Absolutely. I'll echo that the Conservatives have been owning the economic files, I think, and with the state of the economy and high interest rates and continued inflation and housing affordability, they were very smart to get on those issues from the beginning and just continue to pound on them. And it hasn't seemed like the Liberals have had really a strong answer for any of those issues so far. I think another thing that the Conservatives and Pierre's team have done really well is start to tell more of his backstory and share his personality with Canadians and that of his family. Getting Anna, his wife, out there has been a huge asset. Her being an immigrant from Venezuela, who's trilingual, who grew up in Quebec. She's a very strong asset, and I would expect to see more of her on the campaign trail going forward. And then just even his own personal story of being adopted growing up, and having a gay father. So that is something that I'm glad they did in this latter half of the year, because I think that was the missing ingredient prior to that. In terms of other leaders, Jagmeet Singh, I think, hasn't done much right this year. We haven't talked about him yet. Of course, the NDP are in the supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, and they haven't gotten that much out of it yet. So there's the two big things they want are a dental care program for low-income Canadians, and right now that's still a stopgap measure where they're mailing out essentially checks. They're putting funds into people's bank accounts, and there still haven't been concrete details on what that program will look like going forward. And a pharmacare legislation was supposed to be tabled by the end of this year, and the NDP have said they're willing to negotiate on that. They're hoping maybe they can get a better deal if they wait longer. But we'll see. In the meantime, the NDP haven't been doing very well in the polls. And the thing is, in this economic climate, they should be owning it. They should be owning it with young people, with the working class. Instead, they're bleeding support, not even to the Liberals, but to the Conservatives. They're losing union votes. They're losing young votes. And they should be like five-alarm fire right now, but they don't seem to be pivoting at all in any meaningful way.
Okay, so Sabrina, can the Liberals recover in 2024?
I would say most likely not. I mean, never say never, but the polls really aren't good right now. Something drastic would have to happen where they either had some sort of major unforeseeable win, or the Conservatives really, walked into a wall face first sort of scenario. But the gap seems a bit insurmountable. The big question is what happens if Trudeau leaves, right? I think if Trudeau stays, polls probably stay about the same, maybe with some peaks and valleys. But if he does decide to take a walk in the snow and someone else comes in, especially if it's a leader with strong economic credentials, that could be a game changer, especially when we're potentially 2 years out from an election in October 2025.
Supriya, same question. Can the Liberals recover in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't think the polls are insurmountable right now, because I think, quite frankly, polling on an election where there's not even a date in sight in the foreseeable near term is a lot of noise for political folks and, people that live and breathe inside the bubble. But I would be curious as to how many people you polled at Yonge and Dundas Square in Toronto, or pick some other, busy intersection anywhere in another city in Canada, and asked their first 100 people who the leader of the Conservative Party even was, and how many people could accurately answer that question. And so it's interesting to me that so much focus has been on polling, and I get it, it makes sense. It's fodder. Horse races are fun. But if you look to a few, issues that have been dominating the news cycle over the last few months, if 2024 sees a much better picture for Canadians in terms of rate hikes and in terms of some of the grocery inflation coming down, I think folks are generally likely to be less angry at the current government because of it. If the Liberals start to unlock even more housing units through the Housing Accelerator Fund or through another initiative or some other program that they've put forward, and folks feel as though there is actual priority being made from this government on the housing file, that could also potentially shift things. And then, geopolitically, I mean, when the prime minister stood in the House of Commons and made a just jaw-dropping allegation against the Indian government to suggest that there were indeed credible allegations that India conducted an assassination of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, we're now learning that the U.S. has all sorts of evidence to suggest that something very similar was attempted on U.S. soil. And I think that could also start to see things turn for the Liberals, particularly in ridings where there is a large South Asian diaspora community. And it will be interesting to see if and when the feds table an online harms bill, how that is going to be perceived by the general public, because anybody who has young kids is terrified of social media and what it does and what it's doing to their children. And we're also seeing in the U.S. All these, unredacted and unsealed indictments that are being or suits rather that are being filed against Meta, the parent company of both Facebook and Instagram, and what they knew and the kinds of design choices that they purposefully made without any regard for our kids. And if Trudeau and the Liberals can position themselves as the party who's going to protect kids while, the Conservatives are taking policy tips from Professor Red Pill on how to govern, large social media platforms, I don't think that's going to be viewed as too positively, again, in the general public, especially when you have a myriad of other pure jurisdictions like the UK, like California, like Australia, and like the EU, who all have very sensible social media or large platform policy on the books and how we govern them.
So I hear you talking a lot about runway for the Liberals. Does your answer change if we think there's going to be an election in 2024?
I mean, I don't think there's going to be an election in 2024. And if there is, I think it'll be very late into 2024. The reason why I think that is that I think the supply and confidence, or confidence to supply, I always forget how you're supposed to say that. Is it
confidence supply?
Confidence. Supply. Okay, yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. So the NDP Liberal deal, I think it'll hold I think it'll hold for a few reasons. I don't think the NDP can walk away from this without getting some sort of concrete win. And Sabrina pointed out two very good, measures that they had sort of put forward. But it also depends on the provinces coming to the table. So if you can't get these Conservative premiers to come to the table to be like, yeah, pharmacare is something that we want to maybe take on, which why would they? Then I think the Liberals increasingly can kind of not pass the buck, so to say, but punt it perhaps further down the line. And I don't think the NDP is in any financial shape to go to the polls right now. So I think, Rachel, to your question, I mean, I think there is a possibility always, never say never, but I don't know. I just don't, aside from full-time election time speculators that exist on Twitter, I just don't see it making a lot of sense for the NDP to sort of pull their support right now.
Sabrina, do you agree, or do you feel differently about the possibility of an election in 2024?
I agree. I think if it happens, and there's a very small chance that it happens, it would be late in the year. For the same reasons, the NDP are still paying off their debt from the last election. They're in no position to financially run an election right now. they also haven't gotten what they need to out of this deal. Now, if that continues long enough, and let's say there is no pharmacare legislation through the first quarter of 2024, the second quarter, the third quarter, at what point does the pressure mount so much from their base and their membership and their caucus that maybe Jagmeet does look at pulling the plug? We saw at the NDP convention this October, the membership did vote that if the Liberals didn't hold up their end of the pharmacare deal, that the NDP should back out of the agreement. Now, of course, that's non-binding, but it shows where the base of support's head is at. So that would be interesting to see. From a Liberal perspective, with the polls the way they are, they also don't have much incentive to go for an election right now. They're probably hoping for the economy to improve. The one thing, though, is in fall of 2024, we have the U.S. presidential election.
Right.
And Canadians do spend a lot of time paying attention to American politics. And one thing that has benefited the Liberals and the NDP in the past and hurt Conservatives in Canada is a lot of Canadians tend to end up equating what happens with Republicans in the States with Conservatives in Canada, and they don't always make a distinction there. So I could see perhaps if the economy gets better, the Liberals taking advantage of what I'm sure will be a very dramatic presidential election in the States, especially if Trump continues to run, and it looks like he might even win. And they could try to draw more parallels between Trump and Poilievre, which they've already attempted to do in some attack ads.
Okay, and the theme of looking at our crystal balls, Sabrina mentioned earlier the walk in the snow. There's been a lot of speculation about whether or not Trudeau will take that walk. What do you think the likelihood is of a Liberal leadership race in the coming year?
In 2024? Less than 1%? I don't know. Like, I think if he was going to take a walk in the snow, man, like that walk would have already been had. At this point, it's almost like escalating commitment. You know, when you choose the wrong grocery line and you know you've chosen the wrong grocery line because like the two lines that you're sandwiched in between are just like flying through. But like at a certain point, you got to stay because then you're going to the back of the other line. So you're in it. And like now you just got to keep in it. Yeah, exactly. So again, like anything is possible, right? Something horrific and terrible can happen. The prime minister might have a completely different outlook on politics and, you know, his current just general life situation. But with things the way they are right now, I would say less than 1%.
Sabrina, do you agree?
I think it's extremely unlikely, but I have a bit of a different take. I think that if Trudeau leaves, it will be very close to when an election is actually going to be held. If polls are looking like he absolutely can't win. And we've seen that happen with leaders in the past who do hang on until the very last minute. But otherwise, I think that Trudeau is obviously someone who loves campaigning. It's one of his strongest skills as a politician. And I think he genuinely does not like and fears Pierre Poilievre and wants to go up against him. I mean, Trudeau's a fighter. He's been in boxing matches with senators, right? So he wants to have that fight. And I think he will try to up until the very last minute when it might become clear that he's going to lose. And then maybe he has some second thoughts. And that might leave the Liberals in a very bad position.
Okay, so let's talk about the Tories for a second. Sabrina, what do you think their biggest Achilles heel is right now?
Time. Like, if an election can't happen for 2 years until October 2025, and yes, polls are going really well right now, but that can lead to a sense of hubris or complacency or thinking that this is in the bag. And that is dangerous for any political party. So I think a big thing is they have to remember that this fight is not even close to over. There's a lot of time left. And, you know, we've seen politicians peak too early in the past. Momentum is great, but when you go up, you often come down, and people start paying more attention and media starts paying more attention and taking a closer look at things. So I think it's just remembering that the election's quite far off and nothing's guaranteed yet.
Supriya, what do you think? What's the biggest Achilles heel for the Tories?
I mean, time is a good one. So I want to steal Sabrina's, but I would say that in addition, or to add to that, I think it's what they perceive to be as like red meat stuff for their base. And so I mentioned off the top there, like a few of those things, like the LGBTQ plus stuff that they've been going hard on. Some of the like really terminally online rhetoric and like trying to appeal to the folks that are just popping off angry tweets to dunk on libs all day. I think for your average Tory voter, they care much more about economic issues, pocketbook issues, affordability, even like foreign policy, geopolitics, than they would about like culture war stuff. Like if you can't get your kid out of your basement, you care about housing prices more than you do about some lefty professor somewhere, trying to cancel a conservative speaker, let's say, on campus, right? And I think you saw recently when pressed about some of these issues by journalists, and when Mr. Polyev is actually confronted by journalists in like a questioning manner, his instinct often is to lash out. And I don't think average people care about politicians being mean to journalists, because who actually really does care about that unless you're like the journalist's mom or something. But like, I think it's all, but I think seeing somebody be mean just generally isn't always like in favor, doesn't exactly curry the favor of Canadians writ large. And you've seen that the way that they've tried to position Pierre as like the softer guy with, a beautiful young family with the trilingual wife from Quebec, as Sabrina was pointing out. So I think if they stick to that and less of, him sending out press releases where he's like naming reporters as being on the pocket, like on the payroll for the Liberals, then I think they're in a much better position.
Okay, I'm going to take a little pivot right here, just based on something you said. We had a 10-year-old on last week or a couple of weeks ago, and one of her first questions to us was, why are politicians so mean? Which I thought was interesting, like coming from a 10-year-old who's, she's definitely done her research. As women who talk about politics and who are engaged in politics and write about it, how do you both, and then we're going to come back to the leaders, but how do you both, we get this question all the time. It is kind of vile out there sometimes. There are a lot of trolls on the internet. How, as two women who are so deeply engaged in politics, how do you deal with some of that? Or how are you dealing with that?
I'd say, unfortunately, after, spending over 10 years in the business, to some extent, you do get used to it, even though you shouldn't have to ever get used to that. For me, like, I'm very strict on my social media, like notifications, in terms of having controls about what I see in terms of replies or comments or who can respond to certain things. It's reality. You have to do that in today's world. And ultimately, like, I try to remember, that's that one person's opinion, right? And I can write a column and I can get off the exact same column someone who's calling me, a fascist Nazi, and then the other person will be like, you're on Trudeau's payroll, you communist. And it's just how people are perceiving the same, the exact same sentences even. I think, though, it's to the benefit of everyone for us to try to have political conversations that reach across the aisle, and that aren't, which is why I love what you're doing with this podcast, right? That it's not focused on partisan politics or mudslinging, because especially in today's social media age where people are looking, like, a lot of politicians are playing to clickbait or to just get as many views as they can, that prioritizes content that is angry or that stokes fear. And I do think there are potential downsides to that, long term.
For sure. Supriya?
So, I mean, I very publicly resigned from the morning show because of threats that I was receiving. I should actually be clear, a threat that my then barely 1-year-old daughter had received. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It was one thing when they were coming at me or, coming at my dog in weird cases. Often my husband at the time was targeted. But once, threats against my kid started becoming commonplace or fodder for online trolls or folks that were emailing me directly, threatening emails to my inbox, I was like, that's it for me. I'm out. Like, this isn't not worth it. Yeah. And I've scaled back my social media presence quite a bit since then. So I think it's important to practice good social media like hygiene practices. So like ensuring that any identifying information, if you do have a public platform or you do have a profile, is ensuring that any identifying information about your neighborhood, where you live, if you have kids, where they go to school, who their friends are just kept off of it completely. And to me, I started becoming like, well, what am I even doing right now? Why am I doing this job as a talk radio host when I had taken a very like innocuous picture of my kid and my dog, and in the background, very blurrily, you could see a street sign. And I have a friend of mine who is an investigative reporter, and within like 45 seconds, she sent me the exact street corner, and she was like, so you go to this park here. And like, she sent me on Google Maps and like had X'd all of the places that like I would then frequent with my kid and my dog on this walk. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So it's worrying. And I think, to answer that 10-year-old's question, why are people so mean? Like, I don't know. I think people get kind of self-radicalized when you're just constantly fed your own echo chamber kind of stuff. And let's not forget that a lot of these social media platforms are designed to engage you. And what engages us as humans is often content that is going to make us mad, or content that's going to shock us. And so we also have to ask what role, these ginormous companies are playing in terms of not just like our democracy and like what's it doing, but like what's it doing to like relationships and people and like the actual human toll of that and what that means for like friendships and family members around a dinner table over time. And the last thing I would say is that one thing that makes Canada a bit of an outlier on this stuff is we're the only G7 country who doesn't actually have any sort of intermediary liability legislated, meaning that we're the only G7 country that doesn't hold social media platforms to account as terms of like the kind of content that they host on their platforms. And I hope to see that change in the new year, because I think that will likely have at least some of the larger social media platforms think about the kinds of things that they allow to stay up on their sites.
Okay, I'm going to go back to politics a little bit. 2024, let's look forward. What dominates the headlines in 2024? You both have said probably not an election, probably not a leadership race. So what stories will we be looking at?
I think 2024 is going to be dominated by a lot of U.S. political news, as Sabrina said. Canadians tend to pay attention quite a bit to American politics, if for no other reason. It's always on, and cable news in the U.S. is like blah, 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 like just a constant barrage of like breaking news all the time. So I think quite a bit of attention will be paid to that. And then I think, given housing being such an issue, I think we're going to start to see if the Liberals can't actually continue to, have the successes that they've had with the Housing Accelerator Fund. You're going to people are going to want answers or want to see some sort of further, metrics to show that the Liberals are improving. And then again, lastly, I will just say, and this is because of my own community and our own focus, but again, with this allegations against the Indian government right now and their apparent alleged involvement of these extraterritorial, extrajudicial killings of other citizens, that will be problematic, and that's going to end up, I think, getting a lot of international attention, not just in Canada, but like for the South Asian diaspora community just writ large.
Sabrina?
I'd agree that the U.S. election will probably bleed quite a bit into Canadian politics, and particularly any major cultural clashes they have down there will probably somehow make its way into our politics. I think also the economy will continue to be major issue. Reality is, even in the best case scenario, housing, if we build 5.6 million homes over the next 10 years, that's what could get us back to affordability. Yeah. So housing's not going to suddenly become affordable next year for owners or renters. So people are just going to start feeling more and more pain on that. Same with, even if inflation slows, that doesn't mean grocery prices go down, right? That means they stop rising at such a quick pace. And I don't think we're going to see, widespread, raises that suddenly make up for all the inflation and the increased costs of the last few years. So I think there will unfortunately be more economic pain to come, especially for the working class. Geopolitically, we're seeing a lot of authoritarian governments just become so much more bold, whether it was Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, whether it's Iran funding Hamas and other terrorist groups, whether it's China and foreign interference. So I would expect new headlines to emerge on that front as well, because they're trying to consolidate power and show that they have a place on the world stage. So that will be something to watch as well.
Thank you. We're going to end on a high. We talked a lot about the leaders of our major political parties, or at least some of them. I'd love for you to share with our listeners someone who you think that they should watch, listen to, pay attention. Who's going to be a standout in 2024?
I think we're going to see a lot of younger rising stars in politics over the next few years, especially as all of the federal parties start to solidify their nominations and ridings in anticipation of the potential election later in 2024, but certainly in 2025, if not then. So I'm interested to see new voices come out and emerge, and I think we'll, for the first time, see a large millennial contingent at least run for office, hopefully get into the office, because I would love to see more young representation across all parties. In terms of existing ministers, I think that the Conservative Housing Minister, Scott Aitchison, has been doing a phenomenal job. He ran for the leadership as well against Pierre, and he's, although he's been in politics for a while, he's really getting a lot of attention, even among younger demographics, for his take on the housing crisis and pushing the Liberals in certain policy directions. So I think he'll be a loud voice going into the new year as well. Great. Supriya?
So my answer is contingent on the basis that this online harms bill actually gets tabled in the next year. So I'm going to say, based on that, I'm going to say Justice Minister Arif Virani. I think he's going to be there's going to be a lot of questions that he's going to have to face and have to defend. The online harms bill was initially proposed to go under heritage, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest. It should have always been under justice. And so it will be really interesting to see, particularly when we've seen the tactics from Google and Meta and other, big tech players, how they reacted to the Online Streaming Act as well as to the Online News Act. I mean, it's going to be all out guns blazing for an online harms bill, most likely. And I think the rhetoric from anybody who opposes this legislation will likely, be rife with hyperbole and other issues. And it'll be interesting to see if Minister Virani is able to smack a lot of that down, because the heritage ministers weren't exactly able to for those other bills that I mentioned. And when you don't have good information, what replaces it is, bad and sometimes demonstrably false information. So if the Liberals want to get ahead of that issue, they're going to need a strong player, and Virani's new-ish in the role, so I'm just curious to see how he shines in the spotlight.
I like that answer. I think he's exciting too, and I'm interested to see how he does next year as well. Scott Aitchison obviously is a big housing advocate and is doing a great job, so those are the two to watch definitely in 2024. if I was a betting woman, I would bet against both of you on some of these questions. So I've learned a lot today. Will there be an election? I think is the big question that's hanging over everyone's head. Will Trudeau be the leader going into that election? Something that we hear a lot as well. So it's great to have your perspectives, and we can't thank you enough for coming on the pod. We'd love to have you back in 2024 to see if your predictions come true.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with Amanda and my final words for 2023. Stay tuned.
What an amazing holiday party. We really need to work on doing these in person in 2024.
I would love that.
Me too.
Well, it was so good having Sabrina and Supriya. Like, they are powerhouse politicos. They had so many insights, so many views that I think are shared by so many of our listeners. And I would love to do it in person with them. How much fun would that be?
Yeah. Here's our invite to them. Let us know. See you there. I thought we could just spend a couple of minutes and leave our listeners with a few words about the last few months, and think back to when we started this podcast in the summer and how, like, what has changed? Like, what did we realize over the last few months?
I mean, I think for me, I'm going to make it a little personal about the
Please.
podcast itself,
Yeah.
because I think it's been a revelation to me in many ways when we hear from people who are listening and they're saying, we want to hear more of this. Like, this is a forum for us to either, get a little educated on some things that are happening, or, I don't know, listen to a point of view that maybe I wouldn't have listened to otherwise. And we have a lot of people who are asking a lot of questions, and that kind of engagement says to me that this was something worth doing. And I think whenever you kind of put yourself out there, and you hope that you get a good response. And so for everyone who is listening and who comes back every week, we just so appreciate the time, the investment of time that you make into this. And when you engage with us on social media, ask us questions or propose ideas for 2024, we are all ears. This is as much about the broader community as it is about you and I.
Yeah, I always think back, we taped our first episode in Toronto together on the day that Justin Trudeau announced that he was splitting from his wife. And so basically the biggest news day ever in Canadian politics. And I felt like that was like the universe telling us, you guys go and do this. And ever since then, since we took that jump and that leap of faith that this was something that people needed, it's just exploded, and we get so much feedback that is so awesome. I sent you a photo that one of our followers sent us, because I always dreamed that this would be part of women's routines. So like moms that just needed an hour, half an hour by themselves to listen to something. And there's a woman who sent us a picture of her every Saturday, and hello to her if she's listening, which I'm sure she is. She sends me a picture of her walking and listening to our podcast, and she calls it her mom hour, or she's never been politically engaged, but she wants to know more. And to me, and I know to you, that is success with this podcast. So 2023 has been such an incredible year for Beyond a Ballot, and I can't wait to see what we're going to do next year.
Yeah. And the other really, extraordinary thing has been the women who we've reached out to who have immediately said yes.
100%. In fact, nobody said no.
Nobody said no.
I don't know anybody.
And we have had, the biggest voices in Canadian politics who are journalists and who have been, we brought on Mercedes Stevenson, who talked to us about Israel Hamas and gave us that perspective, which was so important. And then Vashi Capellas, who, leads the, one of the biggest political shows in the country, a couple of them actually. And she sacrificed some of her time to join us, and commentators and pundits, and even a 10-year-old girl, and, our American counterparts. And,
pantsuit politics.
Totally. So it's been, and that to me was also like, you know what? Women say yes.
Yeah.
We talk to candidates who are putting their hat in the ring. Like, women show up when you need them.
Yeah.
They say yes. They get involved. They have the conversation. And sometimes they do it over coffee, and sometimes they do it as they're walking to the ballot box, whatever it is.
Exactly.
But this has been, like, I think at a time when we talk about how divisive politics is,
Mhm.
this is a really distinct reminder to me that when we come together in conversation, good things happen.
Yeah.
Really good things happen.
That's a really good point, because often, you know, when we get asked about the podcast, people say it's really nice that you're from different political backgrounds, but you just don't argue. You kind of just chat.
Yes.
And so that point, I think, is something that when we started thinking about doing this was so critical to us. And the fact that that's coming across, I think, is the great success of this podcast, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has been.
Mm.
And it's been fun. It's also been so much fun.
I hope it's been fun to listen to. I know. And I think 2024, you know, we had our wish list of guests, and by shock, what am I saying? We reached out to all of them, and each of them said yes. And so, like, for 2024, we have to sit down and think, okay, who else do we really love and want to bring on, and whose voices are important? Which
so
is a
who do
good
you want to
problem
listen to?
have. Exactly.
Like, this is a question, right? To anyone who's listening, who do you want to hear from?
Yeah.
Because we're going to ask if there's a topic you want us to cover, a question you want us to ask, a person you want us to talk to, we are game. We are in.
I just want 10 minutes.
Shoot us an email.
Justin Trudeau.
Well,
we'll try. We're going to try.
We could try.
We'll see. But we do have some big, exciting people lined up for the rest of our season.
Yes.
And we really hope that you will tune in and continue to follow us. And please, when you're sitting around your holiday tables, talk about the podcast and ask your family and friends to subscribe, because that's how you can support us if you're so inclined.
It's been a year, and I can't believe that this is the final show of 2023. We want to wish everyone happy holidays, a happy new year. May 2024 bring peace. May it bring peace, happiness, and more political education to all of you. We will speak to you soon.
Talk to you soon.